Produced from the Cube Studios, this is Strong by Science. In-depth conversations about science-based training, sports performance, and all things health and wellness. Here's your host, Max Schmarzo.
What's up, guys? I am here with Paul Fabritz. He is a high-level strength coach working with multiple professional athletes across multiple sports. Him and I have spoke quite a bit off air. He is an awesome dude. I'm really excited to have him on. I was telling him beforehand, before we got rolling here, that he has a really similar background to myself. We both played college hoops. I love his story about how he got to where he is. So Paul, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Definitely. I've been a fan of what you're doing for a while. I've been learning from your Instagram for years, so it's an honor to be on.
Well, I apologize you had to follow that thing. It puts people to sleep. That Instagram is not the most exciting. But really though, Paul, as I said, has an awesome backstory because I played hoops. I'm biased to all hoopers. I'll admit that firsthand. I think it's a unique sport. And not to give it away, Paul, can you tell us a little bit about your background? I wanted to say it and I want to dive into it, but I would just butcher it all. So Paul, tell us a little bit how you got to where you are today, and kind of give us that backstory.
Yeah, so grew up a hooper, ball in my hands. If I'm going to the store, I'm dribbling to the store. If I'm listening to music, I'm dribbling to music. So I developed a high level of skill very early on. But I was not the tallest guy. I was always the smallest guy on the team, and I was never athletic. So of course I became obsessed with physical development and the athleticism side of things. Never really got it through high school. I tried everything: Olympic lifting, powerlifting, the jump shoes, air alert. I did every program that you could imagine, and just never transformed my vertical. So I had a lot of Division I coaches, high level Division I coaches calling me, bringing me in for visits. They all told me the same thing: you are so skilled, but we don't know if you can hang physically at this level. I'm around 5'10", 5'11", and I'm barely grazing the rim senior year in high school. So after college, after high school, I decided to go to a year of junior college. And at my year of junior college, my whole thing was if I'm going to fail and not go Division I, which is my original goal, it's not going to be because of athleticism. So I went all in on that. And in 1 year, I transformed my vertical. I increased 12 inches in that 1 year. After that, I basically went from rim grazing to windmill dunks, 360 dunks, started posting just like random YouTube videos. This is back when it was like flip phones, so the quality was super low. But I started posting it and some people started seeing it. People started noticing the transformation. I ended up getting a chance to go play at Northern Arizona University, which is actually where I'm from, Flagstaff, Arizona. And the coach told me, look, we've been recruiting you through high school. We didn't see that athleticism. We didn't see that potential. Biggest transformation we've ever seen. And so they gave me an opportunity to go play at Northern Arizona. Unfortunately there, I racked up a lot of injuries, broke several bones, and was never able to actually play in a game at NAU. So it was either go back for my senior year and keep pushing on that original goal of try to go D1 and then go pro, which I had all my marbles in one spot there, and I didn't really have a backup plan. But there was something pushing me in another direction, and I figured if I put 12 inches on my vertical, why don't I try this out on some other people and see if it works? And so I just started training kids in my off time. Started training kids in the community at parks. I got into my old high school and just trained kids for free, and they were seeing really good results. The results started to spread through Arizona, and I ended up having a full-on business by my junior year of college. And so I decided to go with that route, and I decided to just scale it bigger and bigger and go all in and completely quit basketball. So I moved to Tempe, Arizona, because I figured if I want to scale bigger, I needed to be in a little bigger city. And I rented space out of this little garage gym. Really looks like it wasn't even a strength and conditioning gym at all. And that's where my early Instagram followers kind of got to know me, that's where I was posting a video every single day in this weird looking garage gym. And, it started going viral and we were getting good results. College players started to trust it. And eventually it made its way to the NBA. And so by my senior year of college, I was going to Arizona State. I hadn't even graduated yet, but I was already getting NBA players to come train with me. So most of them were finding me through Instagram, and I just dedicated myself to putting out a video every single day, whether it was vertical jump or just on movement in general, strength and conditioning, just teaching the science behind everything. So I started getting guys to come in. I had one guy, Malcolm Lee, who played at UCLA, who then got injured as soon as he got drafted. He had a knee surgery and a hip surgery in the same year. And he found me on Instagram, came in, he transformed his vertical, put 7 inches on his vertical and got back to where he was pre-injury. And then after that hit, it kind of went viral within the NBA. So started getting a lot of higher level players to hit me up, and they all said, hey, we stay in LA. We would love to come out to Arizona, but we need you to come here. And enough people had convinced me to go out to California. And I actually linked up with an agent, Rob Pelinka, who's now the GM of the Lakers. And so he brought me out, and the deal was he's going to help me set up everything, and all of his players are going to train with me. So the first guy that I got when I set up our gym in Anaheim was James Harden. So we started training James 5 years ago now. And ever since we started training him, he's had a lot of success, which is mostly luck. He would be where he is, no matter who is his trainer. He could be training with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. And he's just so driven and he's so different mentally. He'd be the 2-time MVP either way. But, call it luck, call it timing. We got in with him. He got some great results. And then it just started to spread. So that's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, I think there's so much power when a lot of the learning comes from your own needs. And what I mean by that is, right, it stemmed from you having a problem and trying to find a solution.
Exactly.
And when you yourself dive into it, you take way more ownership into it, and you do lots stupider things with yourself that you never do with an athlete. That really helps the learning process. And I mean that in a polite way.
No, exactly.
I played hoops. Brendan, who's our producer on this, can vouch. I can shoot the shit out of the basketball. I can't run and I can't move, at least when I played college. And I really got frustrated. I played all 4 years, and I felt like I wasn't as athletic as I should be. I got out of college. I wasn't interested in anything scientific when I was in college. But I got out, and I was like, I want to jump high, man. I'm missing something. I just want to prove to myself that it's not this genetics issue, but it really is something I can develop. And I put on, I think I played at 185, 200, and I was 225 dunking with ease. And so I put on a lot more muscle. I was jumping higher, running faster. A lot of that allowed me to not only dive into the research, but then try to figure out the way to apply it. And so when it's coming from yourself, right, you can really contextualize what's going on. I think that's really, really powerful for any coach out there.
Right. No, it is. It's I've learned the most through just training myself. And I mean, I didn't get lucky with this transformation. Like I said, through high school, I tried every method and I went through everything that doesn't work. And then, luckily I stumbled upon some good resources, Verko Shansky, and some real strength and conditioning knowledge. And I dove into that, and I applied all of the passion that I had towards basketball, and now I applied it towards studying and science and applying it to myself. And eventually I just came up with a system that really worked. And just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to all of a sudden work for 1,000 other athletes. And that's why now I'm so obsessed with trying everything on myself, but then also trying it on, we use our interns as guinea pigs. So if I like it, we pass it on to our interns. If it works for them, then we pass it on to an athlete. Eventually it climbs a ladder and it might make it up to an NBA superstar. But for me, trial and error is everything.
Yeah, it's something that, and not to go on tangent, like on Instagram, you see people ripping other people for posting an exercise. And first off, Instagram's free. Like, please don't harass anybody for posting exercise. It's free information. You don't have to look at it. But
Right.
even on exercises you might deem, stupid or different, it at least challenges you to think. And what I find that to be really important is that you're not constrained by this model of I have to do this, I have to do that. You see people who you have to Olympic lift. You see people who say you have to squat. I don't really care about either of those. I care about my athlete jumping high. And so
Exactly.
I care about a result. And maybe for that athlete, squatting gets that result, right? We need to start working backwards. What's our result? How do we track it? And then what do we apply to intervene? And with that, some of these assessments and profiles that you see online, the research has, I've worked on a couple myself. Those can really bring about some clearer information in regards to what you might do to intervene to get that result. Now, Paul, I know you got a pretty sweet lab there. I've seen it on Instagram. I've seen the force plate. Tell me a little bit about how you assess an athlete when you get someone in off the street. What do you do from the art of coaching side, where it's visual and subjective, and also from the analytics and data-driven side?
Yeah, so one thing that I do probably different than most strength coaches is I watch every YouTube video on the athlete. So if we're getting like a pre-draft athlete, I'm watching every single game that they've played in college and in high school, because we could get you in for an hour-long assessment. You can fake that hour-long assessment. You're not under fatigue conditions. You're not under psychological stress. So you can fake that. I want to know how you're moving at the high school level. I want to know how you're moving at the college level. To me, that's way more valuable than our force plate and our motion tracking and all the advanced stuff that we do. So I watch film at like a skills trainer level. It's kind of funny. The skills trainer is supposed to watch the film, and then strength coaches are just like, well, you're just a human. We're going to train you like a human. And there's some value to that. But I really want to know who they are as a player, because that points us in the direction of where we need to go with them. Because like you said, everybody's different. And some people putting on a significant amount of muscle might absolutely ruin their game, whereas somebody else putting on muscle could significantly help their game. So I got to understand your game. I don't just want to understand who you are as a human. I got to understand exactly where we're going with the program in general. So starts with the film. I watch a lot of their interviews because I got to get to know who they are, where they're coming from, because at the end of the day, what matters most for results? Buy-in. If I can't get the buy-in, it doesn't matter how smart I am. It doesn't matter how good my program is. They're not going to get results. But if I truly understand who you are as a person, now in that initial session, I know how to talk to you and I know how to get that buy-in. And once I get that buy-in, man, the results can be really, really impressive. So you have to get athletes excited about your program, which I think that's one thing that trainers really forget about. They dive into the specifics of their assessment and the science, and they forget, like, we got to get these guys super excited about the program. And when they're excited and they know what to expect, now, the physiology always is going to follow whatever the brain believes. So that's step one for me. Now getting into more of the specifics, when we get them in, I have a physical therapist who takes them through the orthopedic side of things, does a functional movement screen on steroids, kind of breaks down everything that we need to know as far as joint range of motion, manual muscle testing. He's going to give me all the information of their limitations, their left-right differences, their injury risk, that kind of stuff. I'm doing more so force plate and EMG. So with our force plates, we use Hawkin Dynamics, and we do a lot of different tests. So we're going to do standing counter movement jump. We're going to do a squat jump to see what they do without that stretch reflex, just the pure concentric. We do RSI testing. We do a lateral push-off test, and then we do a one-step jump. So we do, or a two-step, to see how they're actually utilizing that jump with a little bit of approach speed. And then we do that and we sync it up with our EMG. So with the EMG, I just want to know exactly how are they firing? Do they have left-right differences? Are they getting all through the quad and not enough through the glute? So that gives me a lot of valuable information on exactly, what muscles are underactive, what muscles are overactive. From there, for some athletes, we do motion tracking as well. And that can be very beneficial, but the motion tracking, to get the data that we want, it just takes a little bit longer. So the EMG and the force plates, we can have a snapshot of who you are within 5 minutes, whereas the motion tracking takes a little bit longer. So for some of the super high level players, we'll do the motion tracking, but we're not going to do that for everybody. And then I get into typical NBA combine tests. So there's just so much data since, I believe, year 2000 is when the combine started. And so all of this is public information. And so it's so standardized that I want to take all of our guys through that test so that we can compare to where you are for, say, like the average speed for an NBA point guard. So we'll do the 3/4 court, we'll do the lane agility, we'll do the standing vertical, the approach vertical with the 15-foot approach. So basically all of those combine tests. And then we also just do basic body composition testing.
With that, I mean, I pause because there's like 75 things I'm trying to ask right now. I'll take it one at a time. I really enjoy the aspect of you breaking down their film and doing the homework, because ultimately what we're doing from a coaching side with any athlete is trying to put them in a position that they can best showcase their skills. And we need to know what their skills are if we're going to put them in that position. So understand, if this guy is, he's lean, he's quick, he's a gazelle type player, let's keep him that way. Right? If this guy is a powerhouse and this guy is built like Zion and he's going to be a 2-foot guy, really dominant lower body player, let's express that way. And I think what happens is, if we don't stratify and categorize these athletes into not just physical abilities, but physical abilities that relate to their skill, then we run the risk of developing ability that can't showcase their skill itself. What I mean by that, it's like taking Shaq and trying to convince him to jump off of 1 foot on his dunks.
Exactly.
Like, I'm sure Shaq's 1 foot jump it might be worse than his 2 foot jump. There's so much momentum and mass going into that he needs to go off 2 feet because he's powerful as hell and that's how he functions. On the opposite spectrum, you have a guy who's like Gerald Green, who's long, lanky, and extremely powerful, but also great at converting at high speeds. Mm-hmm. Right? Maybe he doesn't need to break down the movement into a 2 foot powerful, but keeping him elastic and springy. So I like how you have that stratification, because ultimately we're trying to showcase that ability. And then on top of that, once you have that ability and you understand it, well, then you assess that individual with context, right? It's not a blind assessment of, you jump this high and you move this fast. It's, well, you jump this high and move this fast, and that's important for these reasons. If you're Steph Curry, right, you don't need to have, a 45-inch vertical. Steph Curry's very athletic still, don't get me wrong. He's extremely quick and extremely shifty, but his skill is all about getting a shot off. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, Zion Williamson's skill is all about being powerful and playing a little bully ball to get through you.
Right. And that's such an important point. And I'm a big believer in an athlete's intuition. And so I'll ask them a lot of questions. I'm not going to pretend like I know everything about you, even though I've done my homework. You know more about you than I do. So somebody like Allen Iverson, he has the famous quote, like, I don't lift weights because it's too heavy. Like, that's a great quote. And I'm a believer in lifting weights, but I wouldn't push that on him. And I think that was probably the right decision for him. Now, I think there's probably some injury prevention stuff he could have done, but he's a highly elastic athlete. You look at like his Achilles tendon, it's super long. He has a tiny little calf muscle. He had barely any muscle on his body, but he's super elastic. If we tried to make him into like a force mover and we put 100 pounds on his squat, that would probably make him a worse player. He wouldn't be as springy, as elastic, as fluid. So yeah, I mean, the athlete's intuition is you got to ask them, hey, what works for you? If Allen Iverson said, hey, I tried out weights, I didn't like it, it didn't do anything for my game, you got to kind of put some value in that. Whereas most strength coaches are just like, well, in college, I learned that it's all about force, and so the squat produces higher force, and you completely ignore what the player believes, and you completely go in the opposite direction of where that player should be going, because we forget that it's not like 1 + 1 = 2 all the time. Sometimes you improve your force producing capabilities, or like at a slow speed, but it changes who you are as a mover. So now you're, like you said, you're not prancing down the court with these short ground contact times, highly elastic. Now you're trying to rely on that new strategy of more muscular based work. And so if we put Allen Iverson in the squat rack, I don't think he would be one of the greatest ball handlers of all time.
That's fair. I think there's a key word you brought up, Paul, and that's tried weightlifting. Right? Because you can't, a lot of hoopers or athletes go, "Oh, I don't lift weights. I don't do that." And you're like, well, have you given it an actual, go with it? Because you get athletes who are so skilled that they never had to lift weights because they called the shots. And my famous line I've heard is, I love this line, is, if you don't think weights are important, you've never had an older brother. and what I mean by that, right, if you've ever played a sport against your older brother, I have an older brother 3 years older than me. He was not very good at basketball. I love him to death. He's a great baseball player, but boy, he was not very good at basketball. But he would take me in the court and back me down and score on me at will because he was bigger and stronger. Right. Now there's obviously a big gap and disparity between, someone who's 12 and someone who's 15. But the idea is, we have to understand that lifting has the potential to bring about athletic improvement. But we also need to understand what athletic improvement is. And like you said earlier, Paul, it's understanding this is where I want to be, and I'm going to provide an intervention to get to where I want to be. So we're not going to provide an intervention that isn't going to be directed in the specific path that we want it to go in, because we just assume and we're told we're supposed to do such. We apply it in a way that is connected to that individual, and also, like you said, the buy-in. Let's ask athletes. We had Corey Schlesinger on here, and he was talking about how he lets his athletes a lot of time take ownership of the movement. Let's make them excited. Let's get them in the weight room and let them take control. I know when it comes to exercise selection, Paul, you kind of have a little bit of a different opinion than most. Yes. You're very flexible in what you do and how you do it. If you don't mind, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your exercise selections, how you come up with the exercise selections. We'll keep it with those two questions for now. I might have a follow-up for you after.
Yeah. Well, so one point, I'm not a weightlifting hater. Like, all of our guys lift. What I'm saying is I meet athletes halfway in the middle. So like an athlete, like I've never trained a superstar player that's squatting. Like, these guys at the NBA level, they just don't really love to squat, especially squat heavy. So I'm going to say, how can we get the same qualities without making them feel like they're being beat down under a bar? Well, we could do a rear foot elevated split squat. Maybe we could sneak in a trap bar deadlift and just get some minimum dose work. So I know I'm taking care of the injury prevention side, right? So, but anyways, as far as this question, everything that I do in my program, I've tried and I've quantified with force plates, probably with motion tracking, with EMG. So I look at traditional research, and then I figure out, okay, what is the research showing are the best exercises? And then I say, okay, well, why? So like a lot of studies have barbell jump squat, right? And it's been shown to improve the vertical jump. But then my thing is, can we do that in a slightly safer way and get the same power output? And so I go with a trap bar on a force plate, and then I've shown, yes, we can get that same power output, if not a little bit more. And we now have an option of either dropping to the floor or lowering it to the floor so that the floor absorbs the weight instead of your knees absorbing the weight. And I like having a catch to get that deceleration phase, but I like to have the option of being able to drop it. So that's one example. If you just looked at the research, barbell jump squats work. So if you're completely just evidence-based, you would just select that because that's what you read in the study. But I like to challenge it and take it a step further and say, okay, that's good information. Now let me figure out some other ways to do it where we can make it even better and get the same power output benefits. So that's just one example. Another example is, on Instagram, I've been talking a lot about maximally loaded back squats. And I just don't think that it's essential. I think I think strength is so general that the back squat is not going to directly lead to vertical jump improvements anyways, especially at the higher levels. At the lower levels, possibly. But I think that trainers get caught up in looking at the correlation between back squat max and vertical jump, but that's not causation, right? Like they're not jumping higher because they squat of weight. They're just good athletes who have a nervous system that goes and a ton of fast twitch muscle fibers. So that's why they jump 40 inches. And that's why if you teach them back squat form, they can also squat a lot of weight. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's causation. So I just think that there's so many other ways to do it. And I think you could do it with a trap bar, which might be a little bit less total load on the spine. I think you could do it with a rear foot elevated. So yeah, I kind of just, the strength coaches get mad at me because I just challenge what's always been passed down from coach to coach.
I think when it comes to that, I'm not correcting you in the terminology, but I think you're underselling yourself, right? When you talk about evidence, what you're doing with force plates is evidence, right? That's an evidence-based practice. That is quantifying and justifying your usage of a trap bar based on force plate evidence. I think people think evidence in terms of only research can give me evidence.
Exactly.
That's not true. Like, research gives us evidence, but there are a lot of evidence involved in painting this picture because a lot of it is concepts. If we understand the concept of being stronger in your lower body helps you jump higher, well, then the trap bar, the rear foot elevated split squat, the front squat, the back squat, the Hatfield squat, so the splits, every squat, lower body movements fits into that.
Exactly.
And there are tons of studies that show, if you got a stronger deadlift, you jump higher. If you did box jumps, you jump higher. Or if you ate bananas, you jump higher. Like, there's 1,000 studies showing that you jump higher based on something.
Mm-hmm.
And ignoring the banana example, it's not a true study, but the other studies, right? It might be, I don't know, potassium, maybe it does.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Carbs help you jump high, right?
Sure.
It's the concept of it all that, look, these are all lower body, high intent movements, right? If our intent is maximal in this movement, and they show with isometrics, if you do an isometric where you pull with the intent to move, right, you're having the same neurological patterning or similar to that of an explosive jump. And so now all what you're doing is you're taking the concept of, this is my movement, or this is what the research says conceptually, then we're going to apply it in a way that fits the athlete. And what I mean by that too, is there's a study, I believe Andy Galpin did it, and if Andy Galpin didn't do it, I'll give him credit anyway. He's a great researcher, he can have it, I don't care. I think he did do it. It was looking at explosive kettlebell swings versus speed deadlifts on 1 rep max of a deadlift itself. And these guys deadlifted about 330, so they weren't weak athletes. And it showed that doing a kettlebell swing, I think it was I want to say it was like 45 pounds increased. So the kettlebell itself was 45 pounds. They did it with maximal intent, increased their deadlift by, I think, 25 pounds. And people go, that doesn't make any sense. They lifted something that was like 1/10 of, their 1 RM. Well, they're moving it with such maximal intent that the neurological drive is similar. And I think a lot of strength and a lot of expression of strength comes from intent. And so when we say, heavy lifting, well, heavy lifting is great because you have to have a high level of intent with something heavy. You don't get to cheat something heavy. But if you have the buy-in, like you mentioned earlier, from an athlete who's going to produce that force with maximal speed, move that weight with maximal intent, then we can do movements that maybe aren't maximally loaded, but we're getting similar results.
Exactly. So like on my Instagram, I just posted a video. I was doing EMG just to show the viewers. I hooked up my right glute and I did a bunch of different tests. And the whole idea of, I think, why coaches do maximally loaded back squats is because it looks very similar to the jump. But what I did with the EMGs is I was showing inside the body what's going on. It's nowhere near similar to the vertical jump. So like you're going up max intent. I think I was at like 95% of my 1 rep max. And I hit my peak glute EMG with a flexed hip with my knees at 90 degrees. Now you do like a trap bar, like high pull, or I was doing an isokinetic loaded jump and then just a regular vertical jump. The glutes start lower, and then as we near an extended hip, it goes higher and higher and higher. And then at toe off is when your glutes hit the highest contraction. Whereas in that heavy squat, it hits its highest, and then as you accelerate towards the top, it goes lower and lower and lower. So you're actually functioning in the exact opposite way than we're functioning in the vertical jump. And so that's not to say that it's bad. It's just to show that it's not that similar as most people think. It's very, very different, and it's very general. So we still need to build general strength, but just don't think that like the back squat is some sort of magical way to improve vertical jump. That's just general strength. The specificity is going to be more so in our plyos and more so in our actual skills training.
Yeah, there is an aspect of let's take general strength and keep it as general strength, and let's keep specific and keep it as specific. And what I mean by that, it's sometimes when we look at a movement, let's say a squat, and we say, oh, it looks like a jump, so it must be a jump. Well, nothing's more specific than jumping itself.
Exactly.
Right? You're not going to get any closer. And I think I'm a huge fan of West Side Barbell. I really am. I really like what Louis Simmons does in regards to the way he thinks. I think he's, extremely creative and not very shy about his opinion. But I also like his idea of, let's manipulate movements to maximize our results. What I mean by that is he says, okay, look, you might not accelerate all the way through a movement if you had a traditional back squat. But if we have a banded back squat, then we can accelerate all the way through.
Right.
And that way, we're actually having a similar pattern where we're constantly, providing force throughout the movement with no deceleration. And one of my interns, who's a former intern, he's the sports scientist at Illinois right now, Illinois basketball. We had a long discussion about, maybe anything below like 75% of your 1RM for a squatting movement, we might as well just find a way to jump with it in a safe way.
Right. That's always a question that I ask. That's always a question that I ask. If we're doing like a ground-based exercise, a deadlift, a squat, my question is, well, with that weight, could you jump? And usually the athlete's like, yeah, if you wanted me to jump, I probably could. Well, then we're not getting max intent. You're driving through your sticking point, and then you're hitting a deceleration phase because I'm telling you not to leave the ground, right? And then it's the same thing with like Olympic lifting variations. You go, 40, 50% of your 1RM on a power clean. Ask the athlete, do you think you could have thrown that barbell in the air? They'll be like, yeah, I probably could have thrown it through the roof if you really wanted me to. So that shows by us dipping under and getting that catch, we're not getting max intent, because if you were, you would have thrown it up in the air. So I think a lot of times that's the question that you got to ask is, what would happen if you actually went max intent on that?
Yeah, and if you look at like some of my talks, we discussed this with regards to force velocity profiling, and why it falls short with cleans is because if I lift a clean, let's say, and for some reason I decided to throw the bar in there, see how high I could clean it, right? I could probably throw up to probably, 185 above my head. And if I'm only stopping it at my shoulders, then how much in the tank am I leaving?
Exactly.
And so when you start looking at movements, especially in regards to how can I express maximal intent, and yes, there are times to do a clean with, not maximal, intent if you're teaching full, whatever. I don't dive into the cleans a whole bunch, and I'm a huge proponent of them. I'm not, an Olympic lifter myself. So when it comes to my own technicalities, I fall short. And anyone who's seen an Instagram clean of mine, I have about 885 trolls saying, you did it like dog shit. I get it. I'm not an Olympic weightlifter, but I can still do them. But the idea I'm trying to say is, let's find a way to have that athlete express maximal intent. And maybe it's not the clean for him, but maybe it is. Some athletes can be awesome at cleans, and they've learned and They're just naturally quick at picking that up, and that can be a great exercise. So just like you're saying, let's be flexible in this.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there was a study, I don't know who it was done by, but it was comparing power clean to a high pull and a jump shrug. And the power clean can't even compare to the high pull as far as power output at those lower levels. So like 30%, 40%, 50%. The only time that it started to compare to the power output of a high pull was at 80%. So 80% of your 1 rep max is when the power clean starts to compare. Now at 80%, at 90% of your 1 rep max, my thing is you're gonna miss lifts. So even if you have great technique, every now and then you're not gonna get it up high enough. You're gonna drop under, you're gonna catch with your elbows directly underneath your wrist, and then we're gonna have those forces on the wrist. And for me, like especially for basketball players, we can't afford that. They're getting 1,000 shots, flexion, extension, over and over and over again. I don't wanna mess with the wrist at all. So like already with basketball guys, you get them in the weight room, sometimes they'll do regular push-ups and their wrists will start to hurt because they've been getting up so many shots. So like with push-ups, we have to put them on dumbbells in a neutral position. So the last thing I want to do is load that flex wrist with a bar. And, you know, even if their form is perfect, you're going to miss lifts. So when it starts to compare as far as power output, I think it becomes too much of an injury risk. And that's why I would just take the high pull over the power clean.
Yeah, for any listeners out there, I don't think Paul and I are against cleans at all. Right?
Not at
I am
all.
100% for them. It's just more understanding your population, who you're with, the time you have with them, and what best fits their situation. Right? If you're dealing with an athlete who makes a good amount of money, and their amount of money comes from being able to flex and extend their wrist, let's find a way to not even roll the dice on that.
Exactly.
And that way we can make sure we're not going to go down that path. With that too, Paul, this is a little bit of a left turn, maybe not a left turn, maybe a slight left. We're talking about athletes and specificity and understanding the individual themselves. Nutritionally speaking, I talked to Corey about this. I said hoopers are the worst for nutrition. Basketball players grow up eating dog shit because we play all the time and we just burn off the calories. What do you do from a nutritional standpoint when you get an athlete? How do you go about that process, and what interventions might you have?
Yeah, so we have nutritionists that we work with. So they more so do the initial consultations and set up the diet plan. At the end of the day, it's going to fall on us because we're the ones in the gym with them day to day. So we're the ones that end up having to mentor them through the process and really check up on them. So I've had to really educate myself on the nutrition side. But you know, I dive deep into the research of nutrition, and I think that I'm going to have to use it. And then every year the athlete is like, yeah, so I just eat microwave pizzas for lunch. And it's like, oh, okay, I don't even have to be smart. I just have to tell you not to do that and maybe eat, you know, chicken and sweet potatoes and vegetables. And already that was a good coaching move by me. So we don't really have to go too deep. And it really depends on the athlete. As far as the intervention that we're going to take, it depends on their goal. One area that I'm probably very different than most off-season trainers, I'm not obsessed with getting lean right away. So you'll see like ESPN post all these transformations, like 2-week transformation, this guy lost all this body fat, he's shredded, and it's like April or May, and now you got to maintain a caloric deficit or, you know, really watch that diet throughout the whole off season to maintain that low body fat. And I think that's going to affect who you are. That's going to affect your health. That's going to affect your workouts. That's going to affect your skill workouts. So I think people don't understand how hard it is to push through an hour skill workout at game speed, game reps, and then also do strength and conditioning in a day. We can't be at a caloric deficit for a long time. So, you know, I think that's one area where it's like, if you put on a little bit of body fat in April, May, and June, I really don't care. As long as we're getting after the performance qualities that I want to improve, if that's vertical jump, if that's deceleration, if you're getting stronger, I don't care if you can't see the perfect six-pack. Now, as we get closer to training camp, that's when we want to start getting more and more lean. But I would say that that's one area where people really tune in the diet and try to get guys lean as possible right away. And I think it has issues on the back end. When guys go into these caloric deficits for the entire off season, you might have immune issues. You might have more joint pain, and you might just be pissed off the whole off season and have those mood swings. So I would rather just see you maybe make some changes. Maybe we drop some refined carbs and we kick up your protein and we have some healthy fats. And as long as you're doing that and we're working out the right way, I don't really care how lean you are in the beginning of off season.
Yeah, what people don't always take in consideration is that when we cut calories and then we load a player in the weight room that hasn't been lifting because they've been in the off season, right, the amount of load we've just placed in the body has been multiplied. And so having a caloric deficit is a stressor. That's why it has certain benefits for longevity. It has certain benefits for general health and wellness. But in those studies with a caloric deficit, they're not training 4 hours of skills in weight room. No. Right? It's typically sedentary individuals. And so when we take the concept of a caloric deficit, and let's say someone's trying to do it for whatever program it is, whether it's to look good, I guess, is one reason, but maybe they're trying to introduce new foods. It's okay, if we're doing that, let's modify our training at the same time to make sure we're not overloading them. And a lot of times these guys have come off such a big stress in the season itself that giving them a window of minimal stress, especially nutritionally, because playing that many games and flying that much is a huge demand on the internal system, that we gotta give them a break to actually allow them to develop and allow them to find a place where they can just worry about the weightlifting, the performance, the training, and not worry about looking good for the club, right? People want to, they want to look good for the beach. It's the summertime. I get it.
Yeah. Well, and the problem is GMs and coaches are still, they still have the belief that if the guy looks good, that's an improvement. So if the guy shows up looking really good and he improved his physique, that's going to carry over. But if you're a hooper or if you're a trainer, if you've really been doing this, you realize that those two things are not the same. You can look a lot better and you can still suck on the court. So, I think GMs have to start to educate themselves on what real performance improvement is, and don't be fooled just by like the body fat cuts.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you do too, which is pretty unique, you talk about performance improvements. And we're talking about identifying areas that we really can make big leaps in. And outside of nutrition, you also talk about some of the joint mobility and such like the foot, right? How we just had a foot doctor, board certified ankle surgeon on here last episode, and he was talking about the ability to have that foot function optimally. And you and I talked about this a little bit, but I want you to dive into, your understanding of how you look at the foot, some of the range of motion stuff. I know you're talking about too, making sure when you identify someone's movement profile, does someone, have high enough ankle velocity at toe off? Does someone have maybe the ankle dorsiflexion to actually have the knees get over the toes so they can jump properly? How do you dive into it? I know you posted some of it on your Instagram, but I'd love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, so let's talk about that aspect, what I call patient ankles. And then we'll go back and talk about the foot training. But I call it patient ankles. Over and over again, I just realized that a lot of basketball players that are jumping high, and this is from a standstill, they have more patient ankles where they can keep the heel down for longer. So if you have poor ankle mobility or like really bad ankle mobility, you drop down to the bottom of the jump. And then in that amortization phase, when the knees translate over the toes, the heels come up immediately. And now it's just a push to the finish. It's every joint for itself. And the ankle is not amplifying the forces or the energy from higher up in the chain. But some athletes, they're able to keep that heel down, transition out of the amortization phase, come all the way up until the best jumpers are getting around a 60-degree knee angle, and then the heels start to come up. And so you're amplifying all of the forces. It's basically like the end of a whip. You're amplifying all of the forces that were created higher up in the chain. Now, I've been studying this a lot, and one thing that I did see a correlation is Achilles length. So the athletes with short calf, really long Achilles, they're able to keep that heel down for longer. I think because at the end of the day, when the knees translate over the toes, they've got to feel that perfect amount of tension. Whereas somebody like me with a short Achilles, the harder I try, and my ankle mobility is pretty good, but no matter how hard I try, as soon as I'm transitioning out of the hole, I'm going to come to my forefoot. So I'm never going to be able to keep those patient ankles. But if my ankles were significantly more limited, I'd say a soft tissue limitation, now it might be even less patient. So now it might be right as I'm getting to the hole, I'm already coming up. I think the longer you can keep the heels down naturally, I think you're going to see performance improvements because now the body is acting as a whole, and we produce so much power through the ankle, but it's not coming from the ankle. Like, it's not the power producer in itself. It's just amplifying what's going on higher up in the chain. So I think people do like all these calf raises and stuff. That's great, but the mechanics of the ankle, the timing of the ankle, and the ankle mobility is going to have a bigger impact on the overall power that we transfer through the ankle than any amount of like strength or power that we build in the ankle itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally get it. And I like I got two things there. I like the idea of one, looking at how someone's, body makeup is to determine how they should be moving. Or you'll see guys who are really vertical in their torso when they jump. And you'll see guys who are huge hingers.
Yeah.
And a lot of it depends on how long their femur is, how long their tibia is. Like you said, maybe how long their Achilles tendon is, and whether or not they're really good at using it elastically. So someone who keeps the heel down, you get more of a stretch and maybe more stored elastic energy, versus someone who goes up on their toes because their Achilles ain't worth nothing, like myself, and then they got to use all hips and quads to get off the ground.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
then understanding that aspect and not forcing a square peg into a round hole. Let's really understand how they are as a person, how they move, and then optimize that portion.
Yes.
And then with the calf aspect too, like there's an interesting quote by Verkhoshansky in one of his books, was they did a bunch of calf training, but they did it so they could have stronger ankles. And it was actually really interesting because they talked about how the calf and getting it stronger was much more so the ankles could co-contract and remain stiff when they hit and store elastic energy. And it wasn't meant for propulsion. And so I think in the US, we saw people doing these kind of exercises maybe in Russia, and maybe our lack of understanding of the human body and as regards to, vertical jumps. Because I remember the old jump training programs, it was like 500, calf raises a day.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, my calves hurt like shit, but I can't jump anywhere still. I'm sore as hell.
Yeah.
I can't do nothing. And I think
Right.
a lot of that had to do with a misunderstanding of how each joint functions and what we're trying to get at. And what you're bringing light to is, let's identify how the joints function. How deep does someone actually bend in the squat? Okay, if I'm doing general strength, maybe we do full range of motion, but if I'm making it more specific, maybe we do a shorter range of motion. Maybe we're doing some of the ankles where we're mobilizing it, but we're mobilizing it with the intent to have the heel on the ground because that person has that, long length and the Achilles, like you mentioned, but maybe they don't have the ability to actually keep the heels down because they're limited in range of motion. And so the jumping itself can be, improved by identifying certain weak spots.
Exactly.
In that, are there any specific common weak spots you see with the athletes you encounter? I know it's difficult to give a broad stroke generalization, but are there any things that you see outside of ankles, because I think every basketball player's ankles suck, that you see with a lot of your athletes? Because you get unique athletes where these guys are 6, 8, 7 feet tall, and they are on their feet all day performing what I think is a very difficult task of basketball, being able to run up and down the court. I'd be curious to see some of the common issues you see in areas that you commonly see can be improved.
The number one thing is feet. Over and over again, I've almost like put it together in my head where like the higher level player you are, the worse your feet are, which is kind of, it sounds crazy, but I think that's because the higher level player you are, the more basketball you play. You're obsessed with the game. So the more basketball shoes you have on, like they live their lives in these basketball shoes, and it ruins our feet because they never get out of their basketball shoes. They never walk around barefoot. So we do a basic test where I just get them in. I say, okay, can you spread your toes? So I want to see the biggest distance you can get between your big toe and your pinky toe. They have no movement. They have no conscious control over where their toes are moving. And then a regression. Okay, well, can you at least move your big toe up while keeping the other 4 toes down? Most of them can't even do that. Okay, now can you keep the big toe down and move the other 4 toes up? Most of them can't do that. So what we have to revert back to is doing manual stuff where I hold down 4 toes and then I get them to lift one. Or I literally lift their big toe and I just say, okay, hold that. So they just have to isometrically hold that position. So it goes back to like just getting them to like move their feet and activate these intrinsic muscles of their feet that have been asleep for so long because they've been wearing these stiff-soled basketball shoes. And then we say, you know, why do basketball players have such bad ankles? Could be a lot of things, but it probably starts at the feet, right? If you don't have enough stability at the feet, why would we have enough mobility at the ankles? So if anything's going wrong at the feet, we're going to have a trigger reaction all the way up the chain. The second biggest thing that I see is every basketball player now has patellar tendonitis, which I don't know if this has always been like this, but it's like literally over 90% of the guys that we get for the first time, they have patellar tendonitis. And that's probably, again, connected to the feet. So if we don't have proper foot mechanics, we're pretty much guaranteed to get some sort of knee issue. And usually it's going to show up as patellar tendonitis or some sort of other problem in the body. But yeah, I think everything's connected, but I really think that with basketball players especially, everything starts with the feet and the dysfunction in the feet. You get them out of the shoes and you get them moving a little bit, and a lot of these things can be improved.
Yeah, my feet suck. Like, I played hoops, like they're trash. If you ask my girlfriend, Kelsey, she's like, what's wrong with your feet? And you see guys who take their shoes off, you ever played hoops. The thing is, basketball players have such big ass feet. I don't think people really realize it. Like, these are like size 18 shoes.
Yeah.
And a lot of them don't get nice shoes until they're in the league, right?
True.
And if you're a guy who's size 18 and you can't find size 18, so you wear size 16 because you want to hoop, you have a lot of kids out there who don't actually even have the right shoe size. I played with a kid, I remember very distinctly, he thought it was cool to wear big shoes. And he wore a shoe size that was size 17 and he was a size 13. And
Nice.
I remember he looked like a clown because he'd slap it on the floor, but he thought because hoopers had big feet and the guys in the league had big feet, we have to have, big shoes.
Yeah.
And it made no sense in my head. I remember it very distinctly, like, why are you wearing those?
Yeah.
But we don't treat our feet well, and we don't do that as humans in general. I think a lot of it has to do with our own ecological system that we live in as human beings, right? The world that we're in. We have developed things like cement, which is not meant to be on this world, right? Our feet are not supposed to deal with cement. And so we want to wear shoes because we have to deal with cement, right? If you walk on grass, that's totally fine. There's no pain. Grass and feet are meant to kind of go hand in hand. That's how evolution worked. Feet and cement didn't go that way, and neither did feet in a hardwood. So the idea
Right.
too that you kind of mentioned was like, let's get them to function, but let's not get them to function. You're not trying to have you guys hoop barefoot, right? That's
No.
not what you're saying, and that's really important to take away as a listener is, let's get our feet to function, but function better in the shoe that they're in, so they can wear
Exactly.
any shoe type and not have an issue because their foot is so durable. And being durable doesn't mean doing barefoot plyometrics, right? It might mean doing some barefoot movements and progressing properly, but it also means allowing the joints to move properly, allowing you to have some neuromuscular control. People go, oh, it's so stupid, don't do barefoot balance drills. Well, have you ever stood barefoot and like walked across a balance beam? Your feet have to grip, right?
Absolutely.
You're using things you've never used before. And when you bring
Right.
up that point of getting that foot to function, right, you're really highlighting, let's get it to function in the context that it's in.
Right. And I put together little drills that makes it fun for the athletes. Like you said, I don't want them to start doing plyometrics barefoot. I don't want them to play basketball barefoot. Like, our feet are so bad that if we do that, we're going to ruin ourselves more and more and more. And we're going to get plantar fasciitis and Achilles tendonitis in a week because you didn't progress the right way. So my first step is let's get out of the shoes. Let's do our barefoots warm up on the turf. And then we're just going to do some low level balancing drills. And in those drills, I just want you to maintain the tripod foot. So the heel, the base of the big toe, the base of the pinky toe, no matter what I put you through, and we get chaotic with the balance drills, no matter what I put you through, you can't lose any point of contact. So you got to really grip the floor. And now I might go push you a little bit. I might have you reach backwards. I might throw you a tennis ball that makes you reach for it, and just stabilizing in all these different planes. and I make it a competitive environment. So like, it seems like it's something boring, but then I start talking smack to the guys when they can't do it and they get fired up. And now it's almost like, you see the viral videos of people doing a max back squat and everybody's excited. Now it's like, if you get through a minute of keeping the tripod foot, everybody in our gym is like, yeah. So like, that's our version of the viral video. So like, you got to be able to make it fun and kind of make it competitive, and the guys get really into it. And now every one of our guys is sitting at home, they're watching TV and they're just moving their toes. They're just sitting there like figuring out, can I do short foot? So like, can I retract that big toe? Can I move the big toe without the other 4 toes? Can I abduct the toes? All these different things. And so now we have the buy-in and we're seeing the results, and we're seeing less patellar tendonitis as a result of them simply moving their feet better.
That's awesome. Getting guys to get rowdy over, but
get excited about a tripod foot. They're getting excited. Yes.
That's pretty awesome. And what I like too is like, if that's the structure we're trying to stress and people go, oh, these balance drills are stupid. You never are going to be on an Eric's pad or you're never going to be barefoot catching a ball. Well, understanding that that's the foot itself is the system we're stressing, right? That's kind of the theme of this whole chat here. Let's understand the system. Let's understand the context and find a way to provide an intervention to get the result that we need based on the individual themselves. Whether it's movement and selection of exercises, right? What do they like? What do they need? Whether it's understanding their skill, right? What kind of athlete are they? How do they play? Let's train them in context of how they play the sport. Whether it's looking at and understanding how the foot's going to work in regards to their own ability to move the foot and what level they're on, right? A lot of it comes down to, Paul, as we were kind of talking about, just having, contextual awareness of that individual, understanding their weaknesses based on evidence, whether it's research or your own kind of internal research, and then applying interventions to get them to that level where you feel like they are now able to showcase their skill because you provided better means for them to express certain abilities that fits their contextual profile.
Exactly.
That's my summary of this whole. I mean, it fits perfectly, man.
That's a very good summary.
No, I love it, and it's just, you talk to a lot of different coaches, and everyone has different means and methods, but a lot of great coaches have the same core values, and that's really identifying, understanding, contextualizing, applying, measuring, and that's what you're doing, which is why I think I was pretty juiced to get you on here in the first place. And so I really appreciate the fact that it came out that way, because that's what I see and that's what I read, and that's what we've talked about offline quite a bit. I'm going to wrap it up here a little bit, Paul, but I mean, I'm going to ask this. It might not be worth it. Like, where do we find you on Instagram? If you don't follow Paul already on Instagram, I don't know if you got Instagram at all. Like, where can we hear more from you? Are you writing somewhere? Do you have a website? Do you have YouTube channels? Do you have speaking engagements coming up? Can we come check your facility out? What do you got cooking going on coming up? Tell me a little bit about where we can learn more about you.
Yeah, so the main place is Instagram. That's where I put the good stuff. PJF Performance is my handle. Follow that. Our YouTube channel, we're starting to get a lot more active on now. That's also PJF Performance. I just started a podcast. We're on episode 2 right now. That is the PJF podcast, which I'm hoping we can get Max on there. And yeah, our website is pjfperformance.net. So we do a lot of different stuff. We're doing a certification in the future for coaches. Currently, we have online training programs for kids that are trying to improve their verticals. So there's a lot of different ways that we can help you, whether you're a trainer or whether you're a kid. I'm all about providing as much value as I can. I've never understood the people that gain this knowledge and then they just keep it inside and they only keep it for their athletes. My whole thing is I want to impact and I want to influence as many people as I can. And I'm so passionate about this stuff. I just want everybody to learn as much as they possibly can. And so I'm always providing value on all those social channels.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, if you guys have a chance, go check him out. Look at his Instagram. Posts a lot of science-based stuff, a lot of exploratory exercises, a lot of great demonstrations, walkthrough videos, why we're doing the things that we're doing. Paul does a good job of not just, showing a fancy snippet, but really diving into, hey, this is why I do it, and this is my opinion. but this is why you think it works best. You're not sitting there saying you have to do it this way. It's really just an educational standpoint. This is what I think, this is what I've used, and this is what's gotten results. So I really appreciate that aspect. So if you guys aren't following him already, I don't know what he has, like 8 million followers or something, go check him out. He's basically the Kardashian of strength conditioning.
I like that. I'm going to run with that one.
No, he's a lot less drama filled. And it's a lot more real when it comes to the science aspect. No, I love it, man. Thank you for being on here. Really appreciate it.
All right. Appreciate it, Max.
All right, guys. Thank you for listening. Again, Paul, really glad to have you on. Hope you guys tune in next time. We got some good podcasts coming up soon.